Um, Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Cubase Mentor Series. My name is Michael, and I'm one of the partners of Cubase Center. A brief introduction about Cubase. We provide resources including latest trends in healthcare industry, entrepreneurship, and innovations. We have a great incubator facility with 100K square feet at center of San Jose for the innovations. We also have our own fund for biomedical investment on pharmaceuticals, medical devices, medical services. Cubase is consistently promoting collaborations between investors and startups. Back to the event today, I just want to thank all of my colleagues for making this happen. Dan, Jessica, Tianyi, and Iko. Without your help, none of this would happen. Thanks a lot. Today, we are very honored to have Prof. Xing from Stanford. He is a professor of medical physics and director of medical physics division of radiation oncology department at Stanford. His research has been focused on artificial intelligence in medicine, medical imaging, nanomedicine, and applications of molecular imaging in radiation oncology. Today, Lei is going to talk about the recent advances in deep learning imaging techniques, in particular unsupervised and semi-supervised deep learning, as well as technical tools that make AI more interpretable and trustworthy. Also, he is going to talk about some specific applications of in the next generation of deep learning techniques in biomedical imaging, oncology applications, and clinical decision making. Okay, let's get started. If you have any questions during this talk or you're watching, please use the chat box to communicate with us. Thanks. Okay, let's welcome Prof. Xing to give us an introduction about artificial intelligence imaging. Prof. Xing, the floor is yours.
All right. Let me share the screen. Can you see it?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for the Cubase, Michael, and for the invitation to give the talk. So I'm going to talk about artificial intelligence mainly for imaging and some oncology applications. I mean, this is, so why do we need AI, right? AI, so let's just talk about what are the clinical needs. So before I talk about the AI, let's see. So this is what you're seeing here is a patient. Actually, it's a lung cancer. You can see that almost half of the lung is a tumor. And so recently, there's a new drug, right, called immunotherapy, PD-L1, PD-1 checkpoint block drug that really just very effective, but unfortunately, it's only roughly about 20% of the patient actually respond. So I mean, it really depends on the disease. For renal, for skin cancer, that response rate can go up to 50%, but still it's not 100%. So the question here is, how can we tell, which patient gonna be respond or which patient will not respond, right? Because it's a very expensive drug. You talk about $250,000 in cost, and also a lot of toxicity. So autoimmune disease, etc. So there is a strong clinical need really to differentiate the patient before actually they receive the therapy. So finding the biomarker and AI can help. So I'll give you some example, during my talk. So that just gave you an example why we do AI, right? And I'm sure there are plenty examples you can find from the newspaper even. The AI is helping diagnosis. It's helping patient selection. It's really making the imaging equipment much more efficient, etc. So I mean, in a nutshell, this is where we are in medicine. Okay, So current medicine is so-called evidence-based medicine, right? If you really, it's a very fancy name, but has a lot of uncertainties. I mean, think about it. There are three pillars: clinical experience, okay? So that just depends on how your physician are trained, and scientific evidence, which is abundant, but a lot of time, there are a lot of conflicting evidence, okay? If you're just looking into one disease, let's say, you get maybe 1,000 publications, but sometimes they don't necessarily agree each other, right? And patient value and preference. So this is where we are. And it's only this overlap region is where the patient going to be diagnosed, patient going to be treated, going to be managed, right? So our goal is really to change the evidence-based medicine to really AI augmented medicine. And that's where we're heading for. So we'll talk about AI. It's not something new, right? It has been around since 50s. Really depends on how you define it, but really the concept was brought up already in 50s. I'm sure the news media, the big, small, even the self media, gave you a lot of background knowledge on this. I really, the AI was repopularized in the year 2000, 2014, 15s, right? And I'm sure, later on, almost like every year, there's something big about AI, AlphaGo 0, AlphaGo, and this year, last year, and this is what happened, right? This is just, so the AlphaFold 2, right? So this year, what a lot of people call a breakthrough in AI and in biology. Actually, last year, the AlphaFold 2 was ranked the #1 breakthrough by the Science magazine. Well, essentially, this is a 50 years old problem to predict the protein structure by using deep learning, right? So why protein is so important? I assume that not everyone is a biologist or chemist, biochemist, but just in a nutshell, so protein is pretty much, it's essentially the core component of life science, right? Protein is controlling our immune system, controlling the food digestion, metabolism, you just name it. So this is, there was a international computation, so the CASP computation that has been around. You can see that before the deep learning, the accuracy, the best accuracy is around 40%. So with the first generation deep learning, the accuracy of predicting the protein structure go up to close to 60. So the second generation is all from the DeepMind, the Google DeepMind group. It's gone up essentially above 85%. So that's so with the 80% accuracy, that's really coming to the point that it's practically useful. Okay, it's just like the face recognition, right? In the 2014, that accuracy reaching to roughly 95%, 96%. So that's the point that this algorithm become practically useful. So just quick to show you the protein structure that predicted by the deep learning algorithm and also the ground truth. you can see that they agree very well. And this is actually the new, the AlphaFold 2 algorithm that the first generation was made publicly available. The second generation actually is not publicly available yet. Okay, so the whole field of medicine, regardless, you talk about ophthalmology and surgery. So everybody, radiology, almost like every discipline in medicine is going towards the direction of data-driven. And so oncology is no exception. So we have really invested heavily on, including AI into the clinical research and also in the future, really clinical application, right? So AI, talk about AI, really, we have a five component. They're listed here. Machine learning, NLP, computer vision, and of course, robots. Well, I mean, robots in the medicine, it has been really has a long history, right? A lot of people probably are familiar with Da Vinci surgical robots. And this is actually a device from Stanford by John Adler. This is actually a radiation therapy robots. It was invented actually long before the surgical robots. What you're seeing here is really just a robotic arm, and then there's some real-time imaging. So the real-time imaging take the information and then gave the feedback to the robots so that the radiation beam can chase a moving target. In this case, it's really a thoracic application. So traditional machine learning and deep learning, so these are just the pipelines. Traditional machine learning, it's actually has been around for has been really used for all the clinical study before the deep learning get popularized in 2015. Really, before 2015, actually, almost all the clinical study were focused on traditional machine learning. In a nutshell, you have a input data, and then you go through a manual extraction of features. So typically, for imaging, so there is let me just show you. So there is a special field in radiology called the radiomics. So you give me an image, and I extract some features. So these features can be anything, like a tumor size, tumor shape, and then the smoothness of the boundary, etc. So you actually use, typically you have a few hundred to maybe 1 to 2,000 features, and then you build a correlation model, right? You use these features to predict, to do diagnosis, to predict response, etc. So we do have a book on radiomics and the radiogenomics. So that radiogenomics is trying to link the genomic information together with the imaging information to predict treatment outcome, right? And since 2015, the field is migrating to basically a deep learning. And so the deep learning, you don't have to manually extract any features. So the deep learning algorithm will do it for you. It automatically extract the features and then do the correlative study, the modeling, okay? again, we have a book on AI in medicine, so that really cover some basic aspect and also some clinical aspect. So you can really find that book to learn more. Okay, well, deep learning, it's actually, mathematically, it's a very simple concept, right? If you have an input, you go through a neural network that map the input data to a output data. Okay, so this mathematical mapping really can be classified into 3 categories, and really depends on the input and output. So if your input and output are in the same domain, for instance, if your input is an image, is a blur image, and your output is a restored image, or is a clear, a better image, high quality image, and that, so this is belong to this category, right? I'm sure some people have used the software, try to really have a damaged photo and then try to repair it. Those kind of tasks actually belong to this category. This is a relatively easy task because the data are in the same domain, right? And in the clinic, there's some problem belong to this category, like a super resolution. I'll give you some example, but most of them are actually not in this category. So the second category, input data and output data actually are we call the different representation of the same subject, right? If you, let's say, taking an MRI of a patient, so one representation is the image, right? You see what you see on the computer screen, and the other representation is the measurements. Actually, the measurement data is just a bunch of number. You can't tell, right? Just by eye, you can't tell what this number mean. That's why you need so-called the image reconstruction to convert those data, the measurement data, to the image. So that's called the image reconstruction, or in the case of deep learning, you actually can replace the traditional method to map the information from the measurement data or sensory data to the image. So I'll give you some example also in this category. And the third category, it's your input and output, they don't have any relation, or the only thing is they are correlated. Either basically they have some statistical or causal relationship, but it's unknown. So it's not basically for instance, if you have you're trying a new drug, and the patient gonna respond, there will be some toxicity, but you don't know exactly to what level. And so in this case, you need to really build a model to relate the input and output data. And so these are a lot of clinical trial and the response belong to this category. Okay, so in talking about AI application in healthcare, I mean, it's really, I would say that it's covered from the very beginning to the end, right? From the early detection and decision making, and diagnosis and equipment. So with AI, with deep learning, actually the equipment can be either simplified or its performance can be augmented. So really depends on what's your goal. And therapeutics, right? Drug design and clinical trial design, etc. So assisted living. So you just name it. It really covers the whole spectrum of healthcare. Okay, but the healthcare AI is not an easy task. There are many reasons behind that, right? I mean, first of all, the number of diseases are huge. So if you want to come up with an AI algorithm, pretty much today you have to come up with an algorithm for every single disease. I think even beyond that, because every disease have a different stage, and so there are just a lot of special aspect. So ask yourself, how many diseases are there in human being? You can do a quick Google search, and so I'm not going to give you an answer. So this is your homework. Okay, it will be surprised. The number is huge, and that's why it's very hard to really talking about coming up with an AI solution for healthcare, right? Different type of models, right? The computer science people don't make our life easy. There are so many different algorithms, and every few months there are some new algorithm coming out. So how do you really adapt those new technology into the healthcare? That's actually is a quite a big challenge. And of course, the data, right? The amount of data available for training the model, and also the type of data, right? You think about it, there is a EHR, and that's basically in the patient electronic health record system, and there's just demographic information, the lab tests, you just name it. And genomic data, it's really coming strong. Okay, imaging, right? CT, MR, and also a lot of video data. If you do, let's see, this is actually a video signal from one of my colleague, urologist. So this is a bladder tumor detection. It's a video come from Joe Liao, so he's a urologist at Stanford urology department, and colonoscopy, etc. So not to mention the text, right? So to come up with a model to deal with such a big number of diseases, and also different form of the data, and a lot of time you have you don't have enough data. How do you really train a model using small samples? So those are very challenging, and that also make it very interesting, really, to for the engineer and for tech people really to work on. And even when you talk about imaging, really there are a lot of imaging modalities, right? You talk about X-ray, ultrasound, CT, and even within CT, there are a lot of like a dual energy CT and single energy CT. You just name it, MRI, functional MRI, and PET. So and of course a lot of pathology information. So that's why it's not an easy task really to really come up with something that that immediately implantable in the clinic. Okay, so this is and also the workflow, clinical workflow. If you want to design something, a clinical workflow, you have to know how do you really integrate that into your clinical workflow, because the clinic it's almost like an airline industry. It's a streamline. So step one, step two, you have to know exactly where to fit in. And so this is actually the workflow of the radiation oncology clinic. Our patient, they already, when they come to our clinic, they already diagnosed, right? If they have a lung cancer, we know exactly where they are. So we typically what we do is we do a imaging to, so this imaging is not for diagnosis, it's really for modeling the patient, to come up with a geometric model so that we can do treatment planning. So this is essentially come up with the imaging, and then this modeling, you need to do a segmentation. So a lot of people work on segmentation. So this is where you can find the application. So on the imaging side, we have a lot of problems that the current imaging, some of you may have taken MRI or CT before, maybe. So the MRI is very slow, and you typically take 20 to 40 minutes. You just as a patient, you stay in that dark black tunnel. So it's not comfortable. Not only that, but the motion produce an artifact, blur the image, etc. So there are a lot of work need to be done really to improve the imaging technology. And so modeling, a lot of procedure actually need a computer model. We need to build a patient model on the computer first. Yeah. So like a radiation therapy, we have to build a model. There's a lot of surgical procedure also, right? Before you do the surgery, you want to actually simulate. You want to optimize your strategy of the actual surgery or actual radiation therapy. So this is where, the segmentation, believe it or not, it's being done manually in the clinic. Okay, it's very labor intensive, and but the deep learning really bring a lot of hope to automate the process. And so it's a manual procedure at this point, but it's I would say in this transition stage. There are a few startup companies already come up with a product, try to really replace the manual procedure. And treatment planning is another computational procedure that actually probably a lot of people are not familiar with. So in a nutshell, this is a procedure that we simulate the actual treatment on the computer. So we have a software that model the interaction between the radiation beam and the patient tissue, so that we can do optimization, right? We can deliver a high dose to the tumor and then spare the sensory structure. So in this patient, you can see that the red is the patient's C-spine at the tumor, and then you don't want to overdose the spinal cord. Yeah, and this is a head and neck patient. This is basically the neck lymph node need to be treated, but yet there are a lot of like a spinal cord and oral cavity, brainstem. It's a lot of sensory structure. You don't want to give a high dose because otherwise there will be a lot of complication. So this optimization process, it need AI to automate. Right now, it's just really it's a manual optimization. So I'm not going to go to the detail, but using AI, using data-driven, you can actually automate the process. And this is a delivery process. After the treatment planning, all the machine parameters are pushed to the actual machine. In this case, it's a linear accelerator. So this process is a image-guided treatment. So the radiation beam comes from the top, and then there is on the two arm, that's the accurate imaging system. So you actually image either before the patient treatment or even during the treatment. So So of course you have to, be able to follow up the patient, and actually even before you treat the patient, you want to, tell the patient or the patient's family, what kind of toxicity, what kind of side effects, this treatment can cause, and what is the chance of survival, right? So this is the workflow. And if you really develop a product that doesn't fit in, you have to add an additional step that actually can be a problem. So, so this is a simple example using AI, using deep learning to really facilitate the clinical operation, right? This is, I said we have a physical model to model the interaction between the high energy X-ray or high energy proton interaction with the tissue. But this calculation is very accurate. It's basically as accurate as the actual measurement. But however, it takes a long time to calculate, okay? Because it's so-called the Monte Carlo calculation. It takes a long time to calculate. So the deep learning, what deep learning can do is really give you a fast calculation engine, right? You can actually get a high accuracy, but yet with a high speed. So this is how we can do it. So the idea here is really you can, calculate on a like an undersampled spatial resolution, and then you use deep learning to map that, right? When you do it in a coarse spatial resolution, this calculation will be much faster because the time goes up with the cube of your grid size. So here you can really just getting highly accurate those distribution, but yet without paying for the heavy computational time, right? And I just gave you an example of imaging. So this is the typical imaging image reconstruction process. So you take a measurement, either MRI or CT, we call the sensory data, and this data this is a type of imaging. You can see that from this measurement data, you can't tell anything. So this is we call the sinogram, and then you have to change that. Right today in a commercial scanner, you change that using a model-based or analytical inversion. You change this to an image, okay? But the problem with this process is it needs a lot of data, okay? So this is the data acquisition process. You can see that this is a CT data acquisition. So what you're seeing here is the X-ray tube. It's rotating around the patient, okay, from 0 to 360 degrees. And then the detector on the other side of the patient, taking the measurement. And after this, you convert basically this measurement data into an image. So in this case, you can see that this is what we call the 4D CT. So it's a 3D space plus 1D time. So you can see the patient's breathing process, etc. The image is quite nice. The problem is you have to take a lot of data, and when you take a lot of data, in the case of CT, that you're not only slowing down the imaging process, right? But you actually giving a lot of radiation dose, giving some radiation dose to the patient, right? So that's why a lot of patients actually don't, the first question is how much dose they're gonna get, right? Because they all know the radiation has a side effect. So with the data-driven, And this is really what deep learning can do for us. We can just use deep learning to map the measurement data to the image. But even more, we don't need that many measurement data. So we can reduce that significantly, by order of magnitude. Okay. Well, why you can come up with a good image without enough measurement, or without enough sampling? Well, because you have a prior knowledge, right? So you can actually get a lot of information from previous patient and then utilize those information. So this is a work done by one of my students. You can see that. So what you're seeing here is really, instead of having like a 1,000 projection, we can reduce that to one single projection. So what that mean? That just mean that when you're taking a chest X-ray, you actually can use that information plus prior knowledge. You can actually get volumetric image. Okay, so that's I'm not going to go to the detail. If you're engineer working on imaging, you can go to the paper and read it. So this is the network. It's quite complex, but then again, briefly, so you have an input projection data, right? You can use one or few, and then so the system just goes through a 2D. So this is a 2D representation network, and make a transformation from 2D information to 3D, and then refine the image, and you get your network. You get your image. So we are actually, this process, it works, but this is we call the purely data-driven process. Okay, so the purely driven data process, you need a lot of data, and it just become a black box. So we do want to have some control of this image reconstruction process. So therefore, we actually work on so-called geometry informed tomographic image. But in a nutshell, we're just giving some information. We're not really totally just relying on the data. Okay, we can, a lot of information about imaging system already known, right? Like the imaging geometry. So if you can feed those geometry information or even physics knowledge, and your reconstruction will be much more efficient. So this is a work. So this is the 4D CT. Basically, what you're seeing here is a fluoroscopic image. Okay. And then you can convert that into a 4D CT image. So this is just another example. You can actually obtain dual energy CT with a very cheap, like a single energy CT. So why do we need a dual energy CT? Just give you an example clinically. For instance, if a patient like kidney stone, right? People, if you want to see whether the patient has a kidney stone, so a lot of time, if you just do a CT scan, it's not enough because the stone or the calcification actually they all show up as a bright spot in the kidney. So you can't tell, even you see something there, you can't tell it's a calcification or it's a kidney stone. So with a dual energy CT, you can actually differentiate that because that allow you to know the material composition. Okay, so that because calcification and stone they have a different composition. So that's but that just give you a simple example. But when you're adding another X-ray source, the price go up. Really, you essentially not only the device, but also the power supply, etc. There's just a lot, and the shielding of the room, etc. There are a lot of downstream complications. So that's why dual energy CT is actually not available in every clinic. So what with the deep learning, actually you can actually train a model. Once you have a single energy CT image, you can map that information to high energy. So that's actually interesting application. The same thing can be applied for MRI. So maybe in the future, if you're taking an MRI scan, you don't need to stay there for 20 minutes or 40 minutes. Essentially, you just take a snapshot of the RF, the case space data, and then you can reconstruct MRI. Okay, so this is just this work was done by Len Lee, one of our junior faculty. So it's the same principle, but just using very sparse measurement data, you can actually get MRI image. For radiation therapy, there are actually, there are a lot of other indications. So this is a MR Linac. So the company actually, the R&D lab is in Mountain View. So we have a system being installed. What you're seeing here really, in the middle, that's a linear accelerator. It's basically a high energy X-ray source. Okay. On the two sides, there is a magnetic field that produces the magnetic field, so that you can. The idea here is really you can acquire. You can. What is the timing? Okay, we have some. Have some time. So the idea here is really you acquire MRI image in real time, and then you use that information to control the treatment, right? So that you know where the radiation goes, whether it's hitting the tumor target or all you need is some adjustment of the patient position. So because you need a lot of sampling to get an MRI image. So today's machine is 2D, right? You get one slice. You either get axial or coronal or sagittal slice. And then it's a 2D image guidance. So with deep learning, you can easily push this to 3D. Okay, you get the volumetric information. So this will be a huge step forward. Okay. Well, modeling, I'm not going to talk about modeling because we have a lot of work done along the line. So actually, yeah. So I'm not going to talk about this, but you can go read the paper. But a lot of people actually, especially the CS people, work on image segmentation. So I'll skip this, and then treatment planning. Again, this is really a very domain-specific application. So this is, the idea here is really the same. The treatment planning is a very, very labor-intensive. There was one patient, very special patient. I think we spent like 2-3 days on computer, really try to optimize the plan. Okay, because the goal is really to spare the adjacent organ, and then to give high radiation dose to the tumor target. In this case, it's a prostate, and then the adjacent structure in like a rectum, bladder, a femoral head, etc. So those are, that's why, because they conflicting. You have a lot of conflicting goals, right? So that's why it's hard to come up with a decent treatment plan that really give you the optimal solution. So with deep learning, we can actually take the treatment plan that already done, right, in the past, and then use those to train a model really to come up with optimal dose distribution. So that is actually quite interesting. All the latest, greatest deep learning algorithm, reinforcement learning are being applied there. This is what's being done in the clinic. What you're seeing here is a real-time X-ray, and then in order to see the tumor, we have to surgically implant some gold fiducial marker. Okay, this you can see the white spot. That's the gold marker that surgically implanted to the tumor before the actual radiation therapy. And it's not only expensive, but also, it actually has a lot of complication. It's for lung, for liver, for lung, it's a new the infection, and neurothorax, and for liver bleeding, I just name it. So that's where, in order to hit the target, precisely, so we have to implant fiducials. So with the AI, you can actually let computer agent to tell you where is the tumor, right? You don't have to. So this is a model built by one of the postdoc. What he can do is really just train a deep learning model, and then you can actually localize the tumor target in real time. So this is a pancreatic tumor, and this is a prostate tumor. So anyway, and this is our collaboration with urologist Joe Liao's lab. Actually, you can see that our device already in the OR room. So this is a laptop with a GPU that runs the model for bladder tumor detection. Okay, so you can actually highlight the region that is a tumor, or at least computer think it's tumor, and then the urologist can have a double check. Okay, colonoscopy is the same thing, right? I'm not going to talk about the detail, but just saying that it's very similar to the cystoscope, the bladder scope. So you can detect the polyp. Yeah, the model prediction is response. So here you can actually build a neural network that take the treatment plan, which includes the patient's image and also the isodose distribution, and also the demographic information, feed them into a black box, and then predict what is the toxicity, and then what is the survival of the patient. Okay, so we did this for liver SBRT, which is a special type of radiation therapy. It's called the stereoscopic body radiation therapy, and also we did it for colon cancer. So you really just feed in the patient information and then try to predict the survival of the patient. And now we are working on immunotherapy, as I told you at the beginning. It's very effective, but it's almost like a magic. Some patient respond, some patient don't. So we try to find out a biomarker, before the patient treatment. We can actually, really identify who will be the responder. So with this model, we actually can include all the gene-gene interaction. Not only we can include the tumor, the DNA mutation information, but also the gene-gene interaction information into this model. So actually, at this point, we can reach to 80% accuracy, which is quite impressive, because the existing model come to about 60%. So with this gene-gene interaction, we can actually include, really enhance that by 20 points. That's that's actually quite a big step forward. So I think my time is up, but I'm not going to. So we're working on also the gene expression data processing. So gene expression, so genomics is actually it's becoming a a very hot research and also clinical area, because these days you open the Nature Science, almost every issue there is a 1 or 2 papers on single cell sequencing, etc. So it's a huge amount of data. So when you talk about the single cell sequencing data, and typically it's a tabulate data, right? On the horizontal axis, it's a gene. Normally you talk about a few thousand genes. I mean, the total number of genes is over 20,000, but most time you only have like 1,000 or 2,000 genes that are expressed. And then on the other axis, that's the cell. So this is a huge matrix, and then traditional method to process the data, it's very inaccurate. Okay, I use inaccurate because it is. So with deep learning, you can actually extract a lot of very useful feature, and then do a so-called precision medicine. Because of time, I think we will pass this slide, but just telling you that we can use the gene expression data to classify the cell, what cells are involved, and also a lot of downstream application. Okay, again, so this is actually a learning-based big data processing. You can actually read the paper if you're interested. We also actually have a website. You can upload your data. We can process it for you. It's under construction, but the prototype is already there. Just to show you that the difference. So this is the traditional method. If you want to visualize the data, the high dimensional gene expression data, and this is just example. So with deep learning, with learning, you can actually see much better. A lot of things are clustered together, and now you can see them. So that will translate into increased accuracy. So this is just the single cell. Using the gene expression data to get the spatial and also temporal development of the cellular process. I'm not going to. So this is the ground truth. And this is the trajectory come out from the the deep learning, the learning, and then so without learning, this is what you get. Right? You can see that this trajectory is so bad that it's almost like it's you only see a little bit similarity between the ground truth and the temporal trajectory of this development. But with deep learning, you can see so much better. Okay. Yeah. See. 5 minutes. I think. Yeah. Let's just stop here because I just want to really highlight a few new development, like meta learning. You learn how to learn, and that's actually in this year's CVPR, I cleared all those meetings. Actually, it's a hot topic, and data efficient learning. How do you really learn without huge amount of data, right? And also, how do you really decentralize your learning? Because today, if you want to train a model, you have to put all the data in on your own computer. So can you actually train your data using different basically train at different institution and then come back with a trained model, right? So those are. So yeah, if you're interested, we just had the paper placed in the archive on this so-called federated learning. You can get some sense over there. The other interesting topic is actually so-called the neural representation. So we can again. So we have a paper on this. You can go to the paper and so in nutshell, instead of learning, getting a lot of features, we actually can use the neural network to memorize a function or memorize an image, and then utilize that for imaging, for a lot of clinical applications. I think I should stop here and then maybe entertain a few questions if you have. Thank you very much. Let's just skip this. Okay. So yeah, I do want to acknowledge, the students and trainees and also collaborators. So these are the people who did the work. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Xing. It's really wonderful talk. So audience, if you have any questions, feel free to type that in the chat box or use the raise hand button. You can speak directly. I think we got a couple of questions in the chat box already. The first question is asking if there any successful approach to predict COVID-19 mutations with AI method. Is AI available to use to predict the evolution of the COVID-19?
Sorry, I got a phone call. So what was the question?
Yeah, the question is asking for, is there any approach to predict the COVID-19 mutations with AI method?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Yeah, yeah. I mean, the COVID-19 it's nothing special other than it's a very I mean, it's just a very bad disease. It's causing a lot of trouble. It's a pandemic, but biologically, it's no different. Actually, there are a lot of publicly domain data on the the expression, basically the genomics information. So you can actually use those information. And then the key is, of course, you have to have some data. If you do supervised or unsupervised learning, if you do supervised learning, if you have the mutation information, you can use those information to train your model, and then then to predict the future. Otherwise, you just do the clustering, right? So yeah, I mean, the answer is yes. It is possible. We actually, we are working on basically a project that using the gene expression data to see what is whether what we can do really in terms of diagnosis. But the problem with genomics measurement is it's fairly expensive. Right now you talk about a few $1,000s, right? If you do a single cell, $2,000-3,000. So it's hard to be used for for like a screening or for general use. But maybe in the future when the price come down, so gene expression definitely very useful.
Yeah, we also have another question also from the anonymous attendees in the chat box asking for the CMAP1 looks very interesting. Is the code, has the code been shared in GitHub? Thanks.
It's not sharing the GitHub because the paper is in the process of publishing. So so it's actually under review. So once it get published, it will be available publicly. And also we are building that website. So you can, if you just, as a biologist, just want to use it. So it's probably easier, you just, drag and drop your data and then, you get the answer, right? So yeah, it is a quite powerful tool because a lot of time when you're dealing with genomic data, you have this problem, so-called the curse of dimensionality and the size. And with our technique, you don't have that problem. You can have essentially any size of data. We have never had a problem with the size, with dimensionality of the data. So and with much higher accuracy. Yeah, send me email. So we'll keep you posted.
Yeah, we have a question in the chat box. Is asking for from Mingshi, asking for what do you think about the hyperspectral image rays application in medical field?
Hyperspectral imaging.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's along the line of that's along the line of that dual energy or monochromatic CT work, right? Well, basically it's along the it's a data mapping. So you just you complete some part of your spectrum. In optical, people do that in almost like MRI. You have this T1, T2. I mean, even the T1, T2. I mean, they can be different, right? You can have a different flip angle. So you can map from one T1 to another T1, or from T1 to T2, etc. So yeah, I mean, in general, it is possible. The key is in order to do the mapping, the two set of image has to have some information overlap. I mean, that's something that actually, it's not well studied. I mean, just like transfer learning, right? Everybody use it, but nobody really fully understand when can you use it, and how, at what circumstances the performance is ideal, right? It's just people just use it because they don't have it's a black box. So I think with time, people have to, I mean, for this type of application, we have to have a better understanding, at least come up with a criteria, right? So what kind of information overlap is needed in order to do the mapping, to do the hyperspectral, or or just any mapping in data space.
Yep. We actually got some questions sent directly to me in private. One question is asking for the training for the AI. A lot of AI need a massive data set to train the methodology.
Mm-hmm.
But what if we don't have enough data? For example, the rare disease, we don't have enough data. Is there any way we can try to do that with limited amount of data set? Thanks.
Yeah, well, that's a, I mean, today's deep learning or AI, the AI is not really AI. It's really not that intelligent, right? If it's so intelligent, you don't need that many data, just like a human, right? You just learn from, so that's why meta learning is getting so popular, right? You learn how to learn, and then so you can really just transfer your learning experience rather than just every time you try to get the information from data, because data is a big problem. I mean, I work in the clinic, so I know the pain points. I think not only the number, it's really the quality is really hard to control. You go from one physician to another, you go from one institution to another institution. It's the data can be different. Even the genomic data you acquire using different protocol, different technique, different vendor. You get a lot of different noise spectrum. So how to deal with those problems? It's a big issue. Yeah. But that said, I think yeah, we should somebody, especially for the younger ones, should really focus on working really a small sample, because I don't believe you have to have huge amount of data to learn, right? You can learn a lot of things. It really depends on what you want to solve, what problem you want to solve. You just have to really utilize the data, in a more intelligent way, rather than really brute force. So today, really it's just a brute force, right? It's like if you give me enough data, I can learn anything. I mean that's true. It's that's why like even the model like a transformer, right? I think that's getting very popular these days. Or this is Swan transformer, but all those model, I think, but we're working on it. We can improve really the learning efficiency because the network is not designed efficiently, so you need a lot of data. And I think it really depends on the sophistication level of your model. If your model it's sophisticated enough, you probably don't need that much data, and vice versa. If your model is very very brute force, very rough, and yeah, you just have to rely on data. So I think there is an optimal point that we have not found that yet.
Thanks for the answer. We have another question in the chat box from Xiaole. He or she is asking for the AI aid diagnostics. Right now, a lot of data is from the EMR, from the doctors, from the hospitals, doing the AI learning. But what is a bottleneck for the imaging-based AI learning? And how AI has been used for diagnostic in the United States?
Well, what diagnosis is, it's not that easy. Even just, let's say, the lung. I think I have this slide here. I mean, this is we utilize for different purpose, but you can see what you seeing here is a chest X-ray data that was released by the NIH. So I believe that there was like a 30,000 or even more lately, some new release. So each X-ray film has a 14 classes. Okay, I mean they are 14 or 15. So a lot of time it's not a black white. They will say, hey, 20% pneumonia, 30% chance of fibrosis. So with that kind of data, it's really hard to do diagnose, right? The best you can get is hey, when I see a chest X-ray, pretty much your performance will be like a physician, or at best the best physician today. But that's the best physician. Best physician doesn't mean it's the ideal physician, right? Because ideal physician, when they see your chest X-ray or when you see an image, they will tell you right away what's wrong. But a lot of times, the best physician on the earth, they have to scratch their head and tell you, hey, maybe 50% pneumonia, 30% fibrosis, right? So those are the data. But that's the current standard, because the imaging is not perfect. There's specificity and the sensitivity is not high enough. I mean the label, yeah, the label is basically a lot of ambiguity in the labeling, right? That's the best label you can get. So for diagnosis for certain application, I think it's very good. For instance, if you just want to detect like a bone fracture, all right, I mean on an X-ray, I think that's probably a simple task, right? It's a yes and no, and the image, the label are fairly easy. But unless it's, but in general, it's a much simpler task, because there are some tasks that is easier than others, like a bone age, those things. I think, my general feeling is, we're not at the prime time of AI doctor yet. Okay, so there are a lot of companies working on it, and you just have to find some niche application. For instance, like diagnosis, but a lot of time actually in like a perfusion image, you want to see whether there's they're bleeding. Those are in the blood vessel. Those are relatively easier task than just like a screening test, right? Because screening test is you screen 10,000 people, maybe you'll find 5-10 abnormalities. So those are very hard. And in radiation oncology, if you have a physical task, like, I want to automate something, automate segmentation, automate just treatment planning, those are easier actually. So those are, but not saying that those are not valuable. They are valuable because you're really saving money. You standardize your clinical operation, very useful. So go with low-hanging fruit. I guess that's my point.
Yeah. So due to the time, we have our last question probably. So the question is asking for does AI imaging resolution enhancement algorithm provide reliable information for planning? I think it is asking for the accuracy, how accuracy the planning is. The question is from Ray Tian.
Yeah, well, those are accuracy, those applications are really simpler, and I think those accuracy, you can test, right? Because you have a high resolution, you have a ground truth. I mean, those are, that's what I call the low-hanging fruit. So, so the accuracy is actually, it's much, I would say, 2 or 3 order magnitude. If you just want to do super resolution imaging, 2 or 3 magnitude higher than you do interpolation, like a B-spline, right? Those kind of, if you just try to interpolate from low resolution to high resolution, and you're not going to be successful. You're going to see a lot of, blurring. But with deep learning, yes, yeah, you can get very high quality image. There are a lot of this type of application. People do like a pathology. You want to take a really just use your iPhone to, instead of using a high-end microscope, using iPhone microscope, and then try to convert that into a high quality pathology image. So there are a lot of publication along that line. I mean, this. So the point is, I think that for those type of application, I think it's robust enough. We are at the stage that we can actually, utilize them, at least, for some specific applications.
Okay, due to the time, even though we're keep getting questions, but due to time, we can't have every question. Feel free to contact us or send emails to Prof. Xing directly. So thanks a lot for Prof. Xing for the wonderful talk. We certainly learned a lot today. Thanks for your time. There will be more event from Cubase later. We'll have our global pitch day on June 29th on the global biotech investment in the post-pandemic era. Welcome to participate our future event as well. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a good night and see you next time.